Yeah, you're probably going to get some comments on this one.
Yeah, this is where I lose the audience. Every one of them.
Beep, 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 beep. Live from Wellston, Georgia, it's another episode of the Wartown Times. Be sure to like us on all of our internet doohickeys like TikTok, YouTubing, and Defation Booking.
Hey everybody, it's your humble author, narrator, and fictional character, Minister Daniel Louis Crumpton. It is December the 26th, 2024, so we just had our winter solstice holiday, and all of you express your First Amendment in different ways, so you can copy and paste your, religious proclivity right there. We hope it was very memorable for you this holiday, and warm and cozy, and we hope that you hold it close to your heart, because it may be the last one for a long time, especially after what you guys did with the popularity contest for grown-ups in November in selecting your corporate overlords, both nationally and locally. So I've had a lot of time to think about the results of the election, and at any time I could have just hit record and spew vomited my thoughts at you guys, but I didn't want to do that. I felt that before I departed for a while to go do other things, that I wanted to be very articulate and relay my thoughts and feelings post-election to you in a real comprehensible way. So I thought the best way to do that was to return to form. I wear a lot of titles, but the one that is first and foremost is I'm a writer. So I said, you know what, I'm going to open up the Mistress, the blank white page, and put my thoughts out concisely rather than just, ad-lib into the camera, because I wanted to really articulate to you guys what I think and feel about our country and our area moving forward with the results of the election, both nationally and locally. So that's what I did. I stopped the flood of information coming in from TikTok because when you try to stay informed, you almost want to consume every bit of data that you can on any given topic so you can be well informed. But at some point you have to realize you can never do that. You can never assimilate enough data on any given topic before you go, all right, that's enough. So you have to kind of make yourself do a stopgap and go, that's enough for now, before you, form your opinions and your thoughts. And so I wanted to do that. I wanted to go ahead and shut off the flow of information, sit down and put my thoughts and feelings on a blank page to relay to you guys, because I think that this past election was a very serious one, as you guys know if you've been following me. And it's going to have a lot of ramifications for you and for your loved ones right here in the fictional city of Wartown. Believe me. And I'm not going to lie to you, this episode is going to be a difficult one for you guys to sit through. It's going to be uncomfortable because I'm, pretty sure you're going to hear something that you don't like. I'm pretty sure you're going to hear something that offends you or disturbs your worldview, and that's okay. And I fully anticipate a lot of you guys, the minute that something that comes out of my mouth that upsets your apple cart, you're just gonna call me a kook and tune me out, and that's fine too. I'm also a minister, and I feel that my duty is to tell you the truth, to speak the truth, as the good book says, in season and out of season, which means when it's convenient or when it's inconvenient. I don't have the luxury of saying things that get people to like me. I am compelled by my creator to speak the truth, and the truth has never been a popular thing. It's never been something that the crowd gets, and so therefore, if you can endure this episode, I applaud you, I commend you, and thank you for being intellectually honest with yourself. But if you can't sit through it, nothing new under the sun. I don't want to take too much of your time off the top here, because this is going to be a lengthy episode, it being a season finale. But I do want to do a little bit of housekeeping with you guys. So a lot of you have asked for us to move the Wartown Times over to Spotify, and we heard you. So we have done that. So we're over at Spotify now. You can either listen to the podcast or you can watch us at Spotify, because technology is getting so cool. It's a double-edged sword, but it's a good thing when you use it right. So if you go to the Wartown Times podcast on Spotify, you'll be able to catch everything from season 1 to 2 right now. Because while we're on break, we're going to be uploading all the past episodes. up until this episode. So please support us. Go to Spotify, follow us, hit the notification bell, and give us a 5-star rating so we can move up in the algorithms. You guys wanted us on Spotify, so we're there. Help us out. And while we're on break, the website will probably be on maintenance mode for a little while. However, there's probably a QR code or some kind of a link in the description box. Bunty Mills over in the Wartown War Room will do that in editing. And you can follow us on all of our social media across the interwebs. We would really appreciate that. So that's probably going to be the best place for you to catch the Wartown Times moving forward past this season. If there is a season 4, if the world's still here. But yeah, go do that. Spotify. It's cool stuff. And lastly, as you guys will see, I have the lovely Mona Lucia sitting in with me on this season finale from MonaLucia.com. Mona played the character New Start Mona here on the Wartown Times a couple seasons ago, which was a gag because she and I have the same twisted, dark sense of humor. And I know if you have to explain a joke, it's probably not funny, but I'm an over-explainer. So you know how when you're watching the news and they have like eye candy that doesn't really comprehend what they're reading off the teleprompter, but they have it for obvious reasons? That was the character of New Start Mona. In reality, she's hyper-intelligent, as well as a very gifted Reiki practitioner and tarot reader. So you can book a session with her at MonaLucia.com, either virtually or in person. And I know where we live, and I know there's a lot of superstitious people around here who've been indoctrinated to believe that things like that are demonic or satanic or whatever. But when you read books, and you understand that the human body does have an energy field and it can get out of alignment, then you understand that Reiki is a scientific thing, okay? And tarot cards are not some woo-woo satanic thing either. If you've read anything by Carl Jung or you know anything about psychology or symbology, you understand the benefit, especially if you're going through a life transition, of things like tarot, because it allows the reader to pull what's in your subconscious out so you can see it in an image, right? So I don't want to step on Mona's toes. That's her profession, but I understand how it works. But I read books. So those of you around here, if you've been looking for a Reiki practitioner or a tarot reader, go to MonaLucia.com and you can book a session with her. She's awesome, and I've personally watched a lot of her clients leave, completely changed. So head on over to MonaLucia.com and you can take a look at all that, get yourself educated. She also has a blog that she's doing with her own Spotify stream, so you can like, share, and subscribe over there too. So all that being the case, she sits in with me on this episode. So if she can endure it, you can endure it. And like I said, I know that I'm going to say some stuff that offends a lot of you and upsets your worldview and picks on your team sports team. And I don't apologize for that. I have to say what my creator puts on my heart in a very honest way, You guys enjoy this episode. I hope it edifies you. I hope it educates you. I hope it lets you know very articulately where I am on the map post-election and pre-apocalypse. Enjoy this episode, and until we come back from season break, do your best to stay well. Enjoy. The popularity contest for alleged grown-ups has concluded, and the citizens of the United States Corporation have pretended to select their next CEO, while conveniently ignoring the fact that they actually had nothing to do with the Electoral College. And as we all know, Donald Trump will once again be the CEO coronated to rule and reign over the gross domestic product of the company most citizens are unaware that they are. While this outcome came as no surprise to yours truly, as it is apparent that the overall script for where the oligarchs want to go has been written on the wall for some time now, there are multitudes still in the valley of delusion that the numbers actually mattered, and the results of the election have them up in their feels, as the kiddies say. A flick through social media, any app will do, reveals that everyone in the cult of Trump is more than giddy with themselves and excited for all the fascist protocols he intends to implement, painted thinly with the blood of corporate Christianity's mascot, Jesus Christ trademark. While the cult of Kamala is clinging on to the delusion that somehow or another their idol of democracy has some last-minute trick to pull, which will reveal the election was rigged and disqualify the yellow calf just before he's sworn in. The irony of the left team, blue team, Democrat team crying the election was stolen by right team, red team, Republican team by way of generic Tony Stark and his Skynet doohickeys is worth more than a giggle or two. Like a ping pong game of mass psychosis from one farm to the other farm, every 4 years the large majority of those who participate with this machine Pink Floyd warned us about cannot seem to come to terms with the fact that it's all rigged and always has been. This most recent and last election was not the will of the American people. It was not the selection of any leader for the so-called free world. The final election of the Corporation of the United States was simply the great American Milgram experiment. In an age of high technology, where everyone can stream the genocide of Palestinians before their very eyes, knowing full well that said genocide is not possible without the complicity of American politicians and the purse strings they cling to tightly, there is no excuse for having pushed a button for either Trump or Harris. No one in any good moral mindset or clear conscience could have possibly gone into a booth to have their increment of voice heard with support for anyone in government at all, not when the government itself is unabashedly hell-bent on executing the insane, eugenics-driven Holocaust on an indigenous people with your tax dollars greasing the gears of the meat grinder live in the palm of your hands.
Learner likes it or not, but he might be dead in there.
What you're looking at is an advert for an experiment in 1961 to study memory. The pay, regardless of the outcome, was $4 per hour. So you decided to volunteer for the study. You're called in for the experiment, and as soon as you arrive, you meet a fellow volunteer and the experimenter. Both you and the volunteer were asked to draw a piece of paper from a hat that would determine your role in the study. The volunteer was the first one asked to draw the paper, and the paper read, "Learner," and by default, you were automatically appointed as the teacher. Both you and the volunteer were brought to a room separated from one another by a wall. The learner was strapped onto an electric chair designed to send shocks and at the same time secure him in place. An electrode was attached to the learner's wrist and a paste was applied to avoid blisters and burns. And on the other side of the room is the shock generator. Although the shocks can be extremely painful, they cause no permanent tissue damage, the experimenter assures you and the learner. So you sit down on your desk. Looking closer at the generator, there are over 30 levers, labeled 15 volts up to 450. Behind you is another table where the experimenter will be sitting to oversee the experiment. With all the preparations done, the experiment is ready to commence. You start by reading a series of word pairs such as red and hammer, cat and dog, to the learner who was instructed to memorize the pairings as you read them through. Once all the word pairings have been said aloud, you're instructed to read the word pair again, but now the second part of the pair is up to the learner to remember correctly. The quiz progressed perfectly at first, and then the learner makes his first mistake. The experimenter behind you told you to flip the first switch, which is the 15-volt shock. Ouch! The learner responded in pain, experiencing his first electroshock punishment. You continue again with the word pair and the learner makes another mistake, but you're told to flick the second lever, which is the 30 volts. As you continue again with the word pair, the learner makes another mistake, and you notice that for each punishment, 15 volts were increased every single time. As the severity of the punishment increased, so too does the response from the learner. He begins to bang on the wall repeatedly and scream on top of his lungs, asking for mercy. Fear, guilt, and dread start to overcome you and you feel a huge weight on your whole body, reluctant to flick a simple switch. You decided to bail the experiment, but the experimenter in the experiment to stop, the more adamant the experimenter becomes. So the question I have for you is, what would you do? Would you still continue with the experiment, or would you simply just leave? This experiment was actually conducted in July 1961 by Stanley Milgram in the basement at Yale University. 40 men had volunteered for the study, and they all came from various backgrounds. The experiment was falsely advertised, requiring 3 individuals with each different role, but in reality, only one role was recruited, which was the teacher. The volunteer who was banging on the wall, begging for the study to stop, was all an act. When the teacher sat down on his desk, the learner had connected a tape recorder to play for each shock administered. Ouch. Also, there was no shock involved in the study whatsoever. Any attempts from the teacher to halt the experiment, predetermined prods, a total of 4 of them, have been prepared to push the teacher into continuing the experiment. The actual objective of the study is to test out how much people are willing to listen to authority figures when told to do stuff that goes against their personal conscience. Only after the 4th prod, or the maximum voltage, has been administered will the experiment be over and the teacher is free to leave the study. Just 3 months before the study, one of the major organizers of the Holocaust, Otto Adolf Eichmann, was captured and was brought to Israel to stand trial on 15 criminal charges, including war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes against the Jewish people. During the trial, he did not deny the Holocaust or his role in organizing it, but he said he was simply following orders. He was found guilty on all of the charges and was executed by hanging on 1st June 1962. His trial was huge at that time, and because of what he said, Milgram wondered if Eichmann and his million accomplices in the Holocaust were really just following orders. Like Milgram and his colleagues, and probably you watching this, would think that only a small fraction of the participants would obey the experimenter until the end, but that is not the case. An overwhelming 65% of the participants actually administered the maximum voltage to the learners. Even the lowest voltage was 300 volts. Although they were all reluctant in obeying the authority, they still complied. The participants were seen sweating, trembling, stuttering, biting their lips, groaning, digging their fingernails into their skin, and some had nervous laughing fits and seizures. Because of how shocking the results of the study were, the study quickly gained popularity and instantly became a classic. At the same time, it had also garnered an infamous reputation because many have questioned the ethics of the study and how applicable the study is in real life. The most notable person that was quick in pointing out the ethics was Gina Perry. However, her argument was easily dismissed because after the study, a survey was given out to the participants after debriefing them. 84% of the former participants said they were glad or very glad to have participated, and of the rest of the 15% chose neutral. Many later wrote letters to Milgram expressing thanks, and they even repeatedly offered assistance and requests to join his staff. As far as the application of the study goes in real life, this is what Milgram has to say. I set up a simple experiment at Yale University to test how much pain an ordinary citizen would inflict on another person, simply because he was ordered to by an experimental scientist. Authority was pitted against the subject's moral compass, and in the end, with the subject's ears ringing with the screams of the victims, authority won more often than not. The study was even replicated time and time again and was found to have very similar results. So to answer the question, would you continue with the experiment? You most probably would.
The Milgram experiment, which ironically was conducted to better understand how the horror of the first Holocaust could possibly have happened, seemed to indicate that people unfortunately will do barbaric and horrendous things to other people just because they are told to by what they perceive as an authority figure. Alleged human beings are willing to shock other human beings to the point of death while hearing the screams from beyond the walls, all because they are told to by those running the experiment. That's a horrible reality to process. That's a horrible world to know we live in. To know that the majority of people will enact suffering onto others, even though they may feel bad about it. But hey, the expert told me to, right? Perhaps some of you hearing these words would like to tell yourselves that you would be among the brave few rebellious ones that would stand on business in the face of authoritarianism. But if you check the box for Trump or Harris in this recent sham of democracy, then quite frankly, you are full of self-righteous shit with brains of the same batch. There is no argument advocating for the left or the right this time that is not within the confines and paradigms of approving genocide. None. Any mental gymnastics to justify a vote for Trump or Harris with lesser of two evil bullshit Fox logic just indicates that your logic somehow justifies mass murder, ethnic cleansing, and eugenics-driven genocide. Own that, sleep with that, live with that, and ultimately count on that kind of karma coming back home to roost where you are and where your loved ones live. To have pushed a button for the Republican side or the Democrat side of a single-minded system devoid of ethics and decency in such a clear great American Milgram experiment, in my opinion, has brought a curse down upon this nation. And that curse has touched every fingertip that participated seriously and will spread throughout the bodies, minds, and hearts of those who voted Trump
or Harris, regardless of how much they claim to have held their nose to do so. This election has made America anathema, cursed, finished, done, and a plague is come to demonstrate the physics of you will reap what you have sown, America. There is no longer a debate that your so-called government is facilitating a genocide in Palestine and elsewhere with your tax dollars, which means your assistance, your compliance, your stamp of approval. There is no difference in this fact had you voted Democrat or Republican in this great American Milgram experiment you thought was an election. Both Trump and Harris are dedicated to bowing at the altar of Rothschild Zionism, which is not to be confused with any shade of Judaism, and continuing the silly notion that Israel is defending itself with our weapons and war chest. And while the cult of Trump actually believes this sort of wholesale slaughter is the will of their corporate Christian God, the heralds of Harris have shown they are perfectly fine with compromising principle, ethics, and morals in order to get a point on the board with their team getting a win. Two illusory sides with a singular goal: ethnic cleansing with your support. There is no other conversation that should be had in the political world other than this sickening fact.
If Gaza is a hellscape, these men are walking deeper into it, a lower circle still. This ruin, still alight, was moments earlier a post office building. Dozens of people had been sheltering here. A young girl is somehow brought out from the wreckage. No equipment, no uniforms, but these rescuers know what they're doing. A collective muscle memory after more than 14 months of unrelenting horror. Those waiting in the street helping light the way. Israel said this strike in central Nuseirat targeted a senior leader of Palestinian Islamic Jihad who'd led attacks on Israeli civilians and troops. Its scale destroyed or damaged buildings all round, stripping them back to their skeletons. The man in checked trousers being told people from elsewhere had been recovered. My children, he repeats. By morning, hospital staff confirmed 14 of the 40 people killed here were children. A neighbor says earlier cries for help from the rubble have gone quiet, that he'd experienced many explosions, but nothing like this.
Every day there is bombing and killing. Quadcopters check every corner. The killing goes on 24 hours a day. We wish we could have a truce to end the waterfall of blood in Gaza.
But amid renewed international talk of ceasefire, Israeli strikes are ticking up again after a lull when the Air Force was occupied over Syria. And while the world watched Syria, in northern Gaza, the Israeli army continued to destroy more of what little there is for Palestinian civilians ever to come back to. And so often it's those displaced from the north who are killed while seeking refuge.
They targeted a sixth-floor building while people were sleeping.
This was Wednesday night in Gaza City, and a race to save lives from another airstrike, destroying a home to 50 people from the same extended family. Many of them had fled the far north. I'm praying to God they're okay, says this woman. Moments later, her niece is carried past her. Rama, it's me, Auntie. Thank God, she says. But 15 people were killed in a blast that shredded concrete and steel.
They insist on destroying us. It's enough. We need a deal. It's enough. It's enough. We are dying. We are dying.
Outside, raw grief finding many forms. My family, he says, as a woman behind him curses Hamas. For others, no words at all. Lives have been saved here. Beneath the blanket, what remains of this girl's left leg has been tourniqueted, one of many injuries to these children too graphic to show fully. A few beds away, another girl with a head wound. I can't. It hurts me, Auntie. It hurts me, she says. Watching on, Ismail Hader, who brought his branch of the family down from the north for safety, now grieving a son and a daughter.
I raised them. I taught them. Now I've lost them. What did I take? What did I take from them, the Israelis? What did Hamas bring me? It brought me a Nakba, a catastrophe. May God destroy Hamas and the Israelis.
Ya Allah, Ya Allah.
Outside, his niece arrives.
Why did you do this? Why did you die? My love, my brother, Rami, my dear. You're fine. Stand up. You're fine.
Even if, after all the false dawns, a ceasefire really is coming to Gaza, how many more days like this will there be? Can they stand before it does?
America could once be proud that it allegedly fought against fascism and Holocaust when the Germans were doing it, but has cut its nose off despite its face by actively participating in genocide for its bestie in the Middle East less than a century later. If there is a just, fair deity that keeps the score, as most believe, then make no mistake that judgment is on America for these deeds and willful distortion of truth and doublespeak. Yet even through the gaslighting of the church, state, and media in regard to Palestine, the truth is still available and out there for anyone to find. This leaves every voter without excuse. And as I said before, so say I again. Everybody that boasted a vote for Trump or Harris will bear the curse that is cooking in the kitchen of the great chief in the sky. Mark those words and mark them well. Look for no empathy or sympathy from yours truly when those bells begin to chime, because as a minister myself, I did what I could to warn ye all. As for me, I did in fact vote, as I encouraged everyone to also do for the sake of local election lockouts of ultimate tyranny, with the hedged bet that it was in the general election. Yet, for president, I wrote in the secret name of Shiva, as I always vote my conscience, and truly, at this juncture in history, I absolutely believe he would have been the right choice. For most of the remaining slots on the ballot, I did in usual form and wrote in the names of Star Trek captains, Star Wars characters, and other fictional beings from pop culture references. Yes, I actually took the time to type out a write-in for most of the ballot I cast, and while many would find that silly, I can at least say I was fully informed as to who I was supporting in those instances, while everyone else just punched Team R or Team D because they're dumb as fuck, which leaves the actual local candidates I voted for that were indeed on the ballot. Angela King Anderson for Superior Court Clerk, and Arthur Lee Harris for Houston County Sheriff. By my estimation, those two offices were the only rational ones where an actual difference could be made within Houston County during the collapse of the corporation of the United States around us. The clerk of court would have been essential in assuring that proper due process was occurring for the residents of Houston County, a place often notorious for a kind of good old boy system that we here at the Wartown Times refer to as a hillbilly Illuminati. It is no secret amongst the hoi polloi of Wartown and the surrounding areas that for quite some time the gears of government have been tightly held by a small group of oftentimes familial relation that is more of a hidden ideology than anything. And you best believe that where we are now in America, and thus in our local courts, is that of what our ideology is or will be. The courts ought to function on the ideology of due process of law and unalienable rights not being violated by the state via any of its officers. And who best to ensure we, the people of Wartown, are receiving this rational service for the court system we feed than the clerk of Superior Court? Angela King Anderson had my vote in this regard, as her campaign was one that attempted to transcend the partisan politics that is choking the life out of this county and encouraged a more rational approach of voting for an individual. This very much appealed to us. She was approachable and available to discuss her clear plans for the Houston County Superior Court and was more present with her message on social media within the community. Yet, par for the course, Team Republican took the spot thanks to the red-coated fingertips from the voters in Houston County. Let us hope that Terry Childers is of the mindset that her duty will first be to the people of Houston County in guaranteeing that due process of law and pristinely preserved unalienable rights is the order of the day, rather than the whims or the wills of what her authority figures might say. And of course, we here at the Wartown Times have been imploring the good people of Wartown and Houston County this entire selection cycle to be very resolute in the knowledge that whomever they chose to be the sheriff, he be a man of noble conviction, dedication, and willingness to defend the Bill of Rights on behalf of the people he answers to in the face of falling tyranny from above.
The police need to understand what their job is, and they're never trained in that. For instance, the police in this country, every single one of them, every sheriff, every deputy, every patrol officer, every detective, every chief of police, all must, by law, swear an oath of allegiance to the Constitution. Then there's no training on any of that. None. They are not trained in the Constitution. They are trained in case law. So what is pertinent to law enforcement from case law is the only thing they study, like the Miranda warning and the Carroll Doctrine and Terry versus Ohio and my favorite case, Gideon versus Wainwright, and that was a poor guy who really didn't have an IQ over 75, and he was always getting arrested. One day he got arrested 4 times, and he says, "I never had a lawyer. I never was offered a lawyer. And now I'm in prison for almost the rest of my life." He hand wrote that to the United States Supreme Court. And they said, "Whoa, this is a huge mistake." They got him a lawyer and he was found not guilty and he was released. And anyway, my whole purpose of being here is to train sheriffs and peace officers, thus the name Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, so that they know and understand their role, they know and understand their powers and authorities, and they understand the basics of the American dream of that we are actually police and deputies and sheriffs, that our role in preserving our God-given constitutional American republic, and we must understand that our proper role is to protect the rights of the people. Serve. Oh, well, I'm here to serve and protect. Well, what does that mean, officer? Tell me what serving and protecting means. And so, quite essentially, we provide that training. We provide them the training. Why do you take your oath? How do you keep your oath? And what is your role in our society today? And when they understand that, in fact, how about this one, Kristen? How about this one? How could we ever pretend to protect the rights of the people if we don't even know what those are? If we don't know what their rights are, that's impossible.
If there was one message your humble author, narrator, fictional character, minister, and neighbor wanted to convey to each of you, it was that you are living in the collapse of everything you thought your country was. There is no saving the old republic our Constitution was written for. We, the people, have lost it. We lost it the minute we subcontracted our responsibility to know and enforce our rights to politicians, bureaucrats, and all those goddamn lawyers. When we descended from directly underneath our Creator and below the creature of Congress and the pecking order of private corporations becoming our overlords, we have allowed the very definition of law to be taken from us and molested into something unrecognizable by the members of the Bar Association, whose first duty is to the court, headed up by another member of the Bar Association. Nothing to see here. Move along. Statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances have hidden from ye all the simplicity of the law and the power of your unalienable rights. You are all puppets, tangled in legalese strings. To make matters worse, the modern-day scribes and Pharisees that lurk still in dark, long robes have militarized police that have erected a surveillance system of Orwellian proportions all about town and on the highways and byways while they creep into your neighborhoods and soon into your homes. For your safety, of course. Always for your safety. It couldn't possibly be to track, trace, database, and of course issue citations, summons, and bills of attainder via third-party corporations with city contracts galore. Nope. All those flock cameras are there to keep you safer, Keep telling yourself that. But anyone who has ever taken the time to read the books of the Bible, and 1984 as an addendum, knows full well that we live in a police state, snapping up its armor as we speaketh.
A new legal challenge claims Norfolk's police surveillance system has gone too far. 2 Hampton Roads residents just filed a new federal complaint, hoping to end the city's use of the flock cameras. Now, Alex Littlehales is live in downtown Norfolk. You have developing details on this, Alex.
Eugene, we do. Yeah, these cameras are no stranger to drivers in Norfolk. As you mentioned, there are more than 170 actually of these flock cameras across the city of Norfolk used by the police department that can range from near the downtown district to intersections across the city. But a new legal challenge filed Monday contends that this camera system actually violates our Constitution's Fourth Amendment rights. So just as a refresher, the Fourth Amendment essentially is the U.S. Constitution protecting American citizens from unreasonable searches and seizures by the U.S. government. So where the flock camera challenge comes in is the concern that Norfolk Police Department can basically create a digital footprint based on a person's car's movement and can basically track where that person is going throughout the city of Norfolk. So this lawsuit stems from 2 local residents, one in Norfolk and one in Portsmouth, who drive by these flock cameras every day and believe that their privacy is being infringed upon. This lawsuit goes on to argue their right to privacy is compromised, even if the intentions of the Norfolk Police Department is using it to catch criminals.
Yeah, we understand the Norfolk PD has good intentions. They want to reduce crime. They want to solve crimes and catch criminals. But our constitutional rights don't work like that. It's not a balancing test. We have these rights, and even if there are good intentions behind violating them, it doesn't matter.
So it is worth noting that although this still deals with camera surveillance and law enforcement to some degree, this is a separate argument and case entirely from some of the red light camera lawsuits that we have seen across our region. And later tonight, this evening, we actually dive into the separation between those 2 legal arguments. Live in Norfolk, I'm Alex Littlehales for 13 News Now.
Alex, thank you. In a city response, a spokesperson said they do not comment on active litigation, but they stand by the cameras enhancing citizen safety while also protecting their privacy.
So it's best to know if your local sheriff is going to participate in enacting martial law when Trump announces a national emergency of some sort or rounds folks up for deportation, detainment, or apparently whatever your God King wants to do at this point. And as we have played our part as watchmen on the wall, you must now ask yourself if you have chosen a man that can stand up to that or kneel. Those of you who have followed this season of the Wartown Times, dubbed the Houston County Sheriff Shootout Special 2024, are aware that we, playing the part of the average nonpartisan, rational, spiritual, patriotic residents of Houston County, and subsequently the fictional city of Wartown, did our due diligence to inquire of our sheriff candidates a few things to stay fully informed. Nothing much, just a questionnaire with 30-odd questions on 3 primary topics through the lens of a people who are very, very concerned about their Bill of Rights and Constitution, the good parts anyway, being compromised more than they already are on a daily basis by an ever-encroaching government that is making no more bones about clearly being an empire at this point. The questionnaire can be found at wartowntimes.com or on the Sheriff Shootout Special 2024 video playlist on YouTube, Rumble, or Spotify. And if you, good residents of the fictional city of Wartown, would like a copy in PDF format, just email us at wartowntimes@gmail.com and request the Sheriff's Candidate Constitutional Questionnaire to review for yourself. And while you're at it, do the same with the Friendly Neighborhood Manifesto, a blueprint to maintain a local republic in Wartown in the event of an emperor being installed by foreign political action committees that have bought our entire system of representation into a forward movement towards absolute determination to partake of and actively participate in a clear-cut genocide in Gaza, while lying to each and every one of us about it daily. Might want to know how that's going to affect you on the local level, because it already does. In essence, the questionnaire, while covering 3 major tentpole topics, was an invitation to have every candidate running for the highest elected position in Houston County to tackle questions of a constitutional nature in these trying times. While campaigns are often run on slogans, affiliations, and moderately produced Facebook videos, the truly important element of the final election of the Corporation of the United States was what each individual candidate felt about the Bill of Rights and how it would be upheld during their service to it and the people it is for. One would have assumed that every candidate, especially on the Team Red, Team Right, Team Republican side, would have been chomping at the bit to knock this questionnaire out of the park. After all, its defense is the primary function of the office of the sheriff. Alas, as we here at the Wartown Times have sadly but consistently reported, none of the Team Red, Team Right, Team Republican candidates bothered to respond whatsoever. Bunty Mills, over in the Wartown War Room, was sure to email a copy to significant city officials, city employees, and of course, each candidate both prior to the primaries as well as after, when it came down to just Matt Moulton and Arthur Lee Harris. Each candidate for Houston County Sheriff was extended an invitation to have a chat on the Wartown Times to discuss their candidacy, to better assist the good people of Houston County and Wartown in making the wisest of choices possible during the inconvenient collapse of America. We thought a conversation with both Matt Moulton and Arthur Lee Harris would be a fantastic opportunity to move beyond the ridiculousness of party politics and team sports mentality and what I have consistently said was a very significant and historical race. We hoped that what we could achieve is getting to know the actual man, not the party, slogan, or affiliations behind them as reasons to have good faith that they would perform the job with honor and humility. And while yours truly was very much looking forward to having candid conversations with both gentlemen, that unfortunately did not pan out. While we attempted to contact Matt Moulton numerous times via multiple platforms, the closest we got was a social media manager of some sort who gave us their word they would pass the message and invitation along. Sadly, that was the last we heard from that direction. Fortunately, though, as we have previously announced, Arthur Lee Harris had often made himself available to the Wartown Times, and he and I were able to feel each other out via stimulating phone conversations about current events and our thoughts as American patriots on the signs of our times. While often Arthur Lee Harris and I agreed on a great many things, there naturally were areas of certain topics the two of us were at odds on. In those instances, I found Mr. Harris to be wisely silent before responding, not quick to speak, not rushed to argumentativeness of any sort. He came across to me as a man who truly endeavored to roll things around very carefully on a subject before saying his piece. Not in the manner of a politician, mind you, but in the manner of a man who truly wanted to get it right, which is rare in men these days. And true to his word, Arthur Lee Harris did in fact sit down with yours truly for a Wartown Times conversation a day before the election. Your humble author, narrator, and fictional character was more than honored that our guest took the time to actually come to the Wartown Times War Room and do the podcast interview in person. If you have yet to see our interview with Houston County Sheriff candidate Arthur Lee Harris, you can watch the video podcast on our new Spotify stream. Search for the Wartown Times podcast, give us a follow, and of course a great rating. Then jump into the Houston County Sheriff Shootout Special 2024 Arthur Lee Harris exclusive interview to check that out. You can also find the highlights on TikTok by following us at Wartown Times. It was a great hour-long conversation that really gave the residents of Houston County an authentic look at a guy who was asking to serve as their sheriff, and even took a weirdo like me with his substantive questions seriously, which was really hip of the guy. Again, did I agree with everything Arthur Lee Harris had to say? Of course not. Were some of his responses a bit too statist for my taste? Absolutely. But as you know, I tend to attempt to take topics towards extreme liberty. Sorry, not sorry, as the kiddies say. But what he had proven to me time and time again is that no matter what, Arthur Lee Harris was willing to talk it out. And that is why yours truly ultimately had to cast my vote in his favor. Where there is no ability to dialogue, subjugation is stirring somewhere in the pot. Where conversations can be had, even though they may be uncomfortable or unprofitable, there is room and potential for mutual benefit. But as some book of relevance says, he that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame unto him. Nevertheless, we now know, this being a post-election special and all, that Arthur Lee Harris did not win the popularity contest for grown-ups and get the office of sheriff. That office will now be in the hands of Matt Moulton. Matt Moulton will be asked to swear an oath to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the beneficiaries of the contract, we the people. He will swear to defend it from enemies both foreign and domestic. The Most High will hear his oath and hold him to it. And during these times we are all living in, that is a position I do not envy of Mr. Moulton, for it ought to be one of fear and trembling. He will not be the sheriff of Houston County during times of same old, same old. No, Matt Moulton is going to be the sheriff during the collapse of an empire and the desperate rising technocratic police state that is left in the wake of a compromised civilization. A civilization that teeter-totters on self-annihilation or world annihilation, whichever comes first, every single day now. For this cause, I implore all residents of Houston County and Wartown to pray for this man continually, for he will need it. Let us speak plainly now, good residents of Wartown, about the nature of the current world we live in and might be going into. Try as local government officials and structures might to keep you lulled into the slumber that our community is immune from the cascading effects of the rest of the world, as your humble author, narrator, fictional character, minister, neighbor, and friend, I assure you that is not the case. While the corporation of the fictional city of Wartown has regular ceremonies, awards, and activities that give the impression we live in the Truman Show, a utopia detached from a world on fire, for those with the eyes to see and the ears to hear know full well where we are on the map. Good people of Wartown, your structures of government have been completely taken over by an oligarchy. They have saturated your political parties from the top down, making them ineffectual at any level. At the top, they are pouring your money into an apartheid criminal state and facilitating an undebatable and undeniable genocide. Your government is yoking you with the wholesale butchering of men, women, children, indigenous to Palestine. The mother brain-like federal government that has gone completely and utterly insane with some sort of deranged disease is literally going further than the Nazis could have ever hoped for. And if you are ignorant of this, if you are blind to the wasteland that Gaza has become with the power and the might of the United States corporate zombie military industrial complex, then you are willingly so, and shame upon your head and a plague to come at your doorstep.
Where to run? Where's safe? Gunshots ring out. Children scream in terror. There's chaos, panic. Help us, God, help us, O Arabs, he screams.
This is my grandson. I don't know where his mother is. He's just 20 days old. What can I do with him now? Where can I go with him? Where can I find his mother and father? Please tell me where to search. We're tired. We can't cope anymore.
The stream of people fleeing looks endless. Close to 500,000 Gazans ordered to leave their already destroyed homes by the Israeli army as they launch a fresh assault on Khan Yunis, accusing Hamas of firing rockets from the area. A brother pulls along his sister, too weak to walk. Little legs struggle to keep up in the heat. An elderly woman sits down on the side of the road. Is it better to die here than keep on running and running? Amongst the crowd, 3 young siblings. We saw many people who were dead in front of us. Their stomachs were cut open, he says. We don't know where our parents are now. Are we in a safe place now, one asks. Thank God, he sighs. But where to go now? The so-called humanitarian zone Israel has told them to flee to has been repeatedly targeted too. Practically Gaza's entire population has been displaced, time and time again. This is the fate of those who couldn't escape in time. Patients sprawled on the floor of an overwhelmed hospital. Helpless parents look on. Outside in the courtyard, the grief is too much to bear. Bodies taken away to be buried. Just 70-odd miles away, a different world. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu setting off from Tel Aviv for Washington, D.C.
I will tell my friends on both sides of the aisle that regardless who the American people choose as their next president, Israel remains America's indispensable and strong ally in the Middle East.
But Netanyahu faces anger at home. Protests over the weekend calling on him not to fly out without agreeing a ceasefire deal that would see Israeli hostages returned. Today, the military announced the deaths of 2 more in Gaza. Talks are taking place, but progress is painfully slow. Back in Khan Yunis, Palestinian anger is at times directed at Hamas too. But it's Israeli bombs they're fleeing from. And who can tell Gaza's children when their suffering will end?
If you have yet to stomach their handiwork, I urge you to face it and force yourself to look at the endless hours of footage of babies being blown to bits while the IDF behave as if the world is their private GTA Online. The United States corporation has gone mad in every topic outside of that fact that they are perpetuating the war crimes of Israel are complicit with its crimes against humanity is nothing more than a distraction so pseudo-intellectuals can keep having their political circle jerks. Folks, this country is the bad guy of the world now, and though it pains me to bring you this news, as a man who takes his life as a ministry very seriously, it's the uncomfortable truth. And while politicians and political candidates want to avoid these hard truths around these parts and continue propping up the illusion local government hasn't also been infected by this madness, as a minister of the Most High, I'm compelled by my Creator to speak these ugly truths, which is why I can never run for office of any kind. The great gig in the sky will not allow my words and my wit to be bound by the script of corporate fictions that pretend to be government when they simply are not. While the District of Columbia keeps the Fourth Reich going by repeating over and over again that Israel is our best globalist buddy and ally in democracy, as if democracy isn't a horrid thing, or a fancy way of saying mob rule. Down here in the belt of the Bible, they keep the murder machine going by way of brainwashing through the local churches, which are nothing more than smaller franchises of the beast at large. Whereas most political punditry cannot or will not tiptoe in the line between church and state, yours truly, as a minister of the very First Amendment, enjoys the luxury of being able to cry for the town in aspects both politically and spiritually, a right I very much intend to park at and utilize here for a few moments of our precious time together. And why shouldn't I? After all, the fictional city of Wartown now has a brigade of town pastors, ministers, preachers, etc., in a committee of some sort codified by the corporation, and it has no issue opening up its city hall meetings with prayer, often in the name of Christ Jesus. So certainly the good people of Wartown wouldn't begrudge me some spiritual snipes as a watchman on the wall in the context of how ye all are portraying this area of the Bible's belt and the character it is aspiring to project. Everyone would like to believe they have a monopoly on the person and teachings of Jesus Christ, especially around these parts, and particularly in the red team, right team, Republican team circles, which congress with the 501c3s calling themselves churches in an almost very literal interpretation of the phrase to congress. The ideology that is transmitted throughout the corporate Christian churches is the lifeblood of the now rusting political structures that have run Wartown and Houston County. All aspects calling itself state, in fact, being an extension of the church. The final solution of that ideology is the butchering of human beings in Palestine, the militarization of our police, the erection of an invasive surveillance state, the establishment and maintenance of kangaroo corporate courts, the eating out of your substance by means of threat, duress, and coercion, the profiting from private prisons and probations, which have virtually converted a majority of the county into codified criminals, the erosion of due process of law in lieu of religious or lifestyle litmus tests by trade unions who've shut up the simplicity of the law in legal theater for the service of the taxpayer. And now the anointing of a filthy, debased, beastly emperor with his high-tech false prophet in tow. And somehow or another, scores of illiterate hillbillies who can't read the clear King's English of the Bible have brought all this about, believing Jesus H. Christ would want it this way before he returns. And no matter what they do, they should never question what a genocidal, apartheid, criminal state operated by Rothschild Zionists do, because their preacher outright lied to them about some promises to Abraham or some such thing.
There has been a remarkable number of videos posted by Israeli soldiers on social media depicting themselves pillaging property, mocking the death and destruction that they are causing, and most egregiously torturing, humiliating, and mocking detained Palestinian prisoners.
The images of mass arrests, of torture of Palestinians, of numbering their bodies, which is reminiscent of images all of us have seen from Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib. These images are testament to what Palestinians have long been saying, which is that this settler colonial regime is utterly violent. They show the nature through which this genocide is unfolding in the Gaza Strip. They also show the extreme brutality and torture, violence, utter disregard of human life, transforming these violent conducts into a spectacle to be viewed and watched on social media posts.
They lack specific intelligence about who actually might be Hamas. And because they lack intelligence, they therefore are rounding up everyone in order to hope to extract information through interrogation. The fact that they've been stripped to their underwear is, a manifestation of cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, which is also illegal in addition to torture. The fact that they're photographing these things, it's like trophy shots. What this depicts, I think, very vividly is dehumanization and torture. The idea that somebody can be just like their body is just being attacked, in their most vulnerable position. His hands are bound behind his back. He's lying face down, soldiers stepping on his face. In a sense, it epitomizes torture in general, purposefully harming someone who's in custody. That custodial relationship is a particularly vulnerable one where, the custodians have all the power and the prisoner, who is in this case, not only on the ground and tied up, but completely powerless.
The images are showing us and telling us how central imprisonment or carceral practices are to this settler colonial regime. The torture, humiliation, and degrading conduct against Palestinians is not simply restricted to the Gaza Strip. There are also images and videos that have been circulating from the West Bank. Since October 7th, over 7,000 Palestinians have been detained, which is a number unheard of over the past decade.
Israeli soldiers have quite remarkably taken to converting their massive, really unprecedented destruction of Palestinian homes, hospitals, mosques, universities, churches, schools, into entertainment videos. There's one video where Israeli soldiers are showing some residential homes that they've set on fire and attached a song.
This house is on fire.
There have been many, many images of Israeli soldiers who've ransacked Palestinian homes and confiscated their personal goods. One in particular is the red negligee that appears to be seen in so many Israeli videos where Israeli soldiers are mocking and advertising their very deliberate intrusion of the home of a Palestinian woman, the confiscation of her most intimate apparel, and flaunting that in a way that's definitely intended to be provocative and humiliating.
The videos further reinforce a discourse that is coming out of every sector of the Israeli official machinery, where all Palestinians are the enemy. Many officials have said they deserve to be eliminated. And you see it manifested in that kind of joie de vivre, that soldiers are expressing as they destroy Palestinian homes. And there is a consumption of this kind of image that kind of fortifies the anger, the hatred, the anti-Palestinian sentiment, and the kind of complete disregard of the humanity of Palestinian civilians.
There's such a high level of confidence among these IDF soldiers that they can do whatever they want. To say to the whole world, look at what we're doing to Palestinians in Gaza, look at how we are brutalizing detainees, look at how we're humiliating every single man, woman, and child as we destroy their homes, set fire to them, and make fun of it. And they are provoking and challenging the whole world to say, we can do this, we can get away with it, and no one in the world can stop us. No Israeli has found themselves sanctioned by the international community, by countries that have these tools, which again has only reinforced the belief of Israeli soldiers that they are immune, that they are exempted from complying with international laws, from basic human rights laws, that they are above the law.
Since the beginning of this genocidal war, reservists have been called up. And who are the reservists? They are the entire proportion of the Israeli society. There are teachers, professors, students, doctors, medics, artists, writers, journalists. These images, they are not only directed to a small audience, they are directed to a broad audience. There's a long practiced history of racializing and dehumanizing Palestinians. These images and these videos entirely show how Israeli violence is also not only directed towards Palestinian livelihood, but also their material being, so their houses, their belongings, eliminating Palestinian existence. History has taught us that the dehumanization of subjects is essential to the infliction of violence. I think Israel has perfected this in discourse and in practice, but this is not new. It dates back to the beginning of this state, through which Palestinians were expelled, degraded, humiliated, killed, and effectively, forcibly disappeared.
Good people of Wartown, if your 501c3 church and its director you call a pastor are teaching you that God has a chosen people based on eugenics or genealogy, you are being deceived. If they have attempted to make your common sense impotent and your silent complicity attained in approving one prayer, $1 or one vote towards any people that would bomb a school, a hospital, or a quote safe zone filled with civilians to kill one quote terrorist, they have, like a false shepherd, led you to slaughter. If your so-called spiritual leaders are tickling your ears with this idea that Jesus Christ is coming before some tribulation to snatch you away from the chaos quite literally caused by the church itself, and that before this happens, you and all of his followers should lovingly support genocide, then they are the wolves ye were warned about. And why wouldn't your churches be corrupted? Everything else is, and that was to be expected, unless you have not read. While I am quite thankful of the corporate Christian churches, in that in them I fell in love with the scriptures and the protagonist of them we call Christ, my departure from the church of Laodicea was like a heartbreaking divorce circa early 2000s, where the trauma of infidelity on her part was the cause of the separation. In a post 9/11 world, I observed within the Baptist churches a betrayal of the message, ideology, philosophy, and teachings of the Prince of Peace, with widespread fear-based reactions coming from the pulpit and the pews, especially in regard to Muslims and brown people in general. I saw the American military-industrial complex praised by those who claimed the name of Christ as they stretched forth around the world and expanded a police state in every corner of the compass. I heard with my ears the condemnation of Muslims as demonic from pastors and parishioners, and a blatant intent to label anyone different from them or their power structures as terrorists. I experienced the corporate Christian churches turn a blind eye to the countless murders in the Middle East with our nation's men and women as the weapons of this never-ending warfare. The hypocrisy and departure from the scriptures by the 501c3 franchises compelled yours truly to be serious with the Most High and begin to question all that was being peddled under the banner of faith. After all, if the body of Christ had entered its last phase, then surely great deceit had riddled it like a batch of the CIA's fast-acting cancers. The fundamentals of my Christian faith told me that the final authority on faith and practice was the scriptures contained within the 66 books of the Bible. To know the Word is to know the Logos himself, and it was my duty as a soldier of Christ to part ways with any pastor, preacher, church, or institution that pitted itself against the authority of the inspired words of the Most High. Yet, when thoroughly examined, I discovered the corporate Christian church around these parts was unwilling to part with the great lie of the pre-tribulation rapture, which is one of the grossest distortions of Scripture the world has ever known. And when confronted with the clear teachings of the Bible on the events of the end, or second coming of Christ, yours truly, who at the time was an aspiring evangelist of the Baptist persuasion, was asked by your spiritual leaders in these 501c3s to not return, if I would be so kind. This request was made with an aggressive and firm reaction to protect the flock from the truth of the pre-tribulation rapture lie, and the protection of this deception by the pulpit is what compelled my departure from institutions which have become little more than propaganda facilities for the nation-state of Israel. It has not always been as easy to speak out on the infiltration of the church by Zionism as it is now, in the age of TikTok, where the vast majority of its users are already aware and becoming more vocal about this. And I imagine that around Wartown and Houston County, for those who are inclined to be accepted by these sorts of people that follow along with the ideology of genocide and praying for criminal states executing a Holocaust, with your resources, it can still get you blacklisted. But as the man said, one cannot stop an idea whose time has come. In a community where a majority of your candidates running for critical government positions make absolutely sure they express how much they stand with Israel, or else the party won't even put them on the ballot. The rest of you best ask yourselves how that belief system informs you as to what they think proper government is. I mean, think about it. You have elected officials who pay lip service to the Constitution and Bill of Rights while standing firm in solidarity with a country that is carpet bombing the Gaza Strip in an obvious attempt to eradicate an entire people completely from the planet. You have people prosecuting cases within your community who believe and publicly make it known that they believe God has a chosen people, and that chosen people can pull the entire world into a nuclear wasteland if it doesn't get its way with world domination. You have public officials who support the idea of giving billions and billions of your dollars to a country that is not yours so they can further their military dominance over the Middle East. Furthermore, these government positions filled with this ideology are more than happy to conscript your kids for the front lines when it all ultimately heads south. This same infection of Zionist propaganda has promoted your local officials to believe it's a good thing and for your safety to set up a so-called smart grid imported from Israel, an apartheid and criminal state, while simultaneously militarizing your sheriff's office and police force with weapons of warfare and training from the IDF. And these local officials are doing this while believing it is the will of God. If that doesn't terrify you, Wartown, it truly should.
U.S. police are training in Israel, and that's something every American should be concerned about. As protests sweep across the U.S., it's becoming increasingly clear that law enforcement has become more militarized, treating the people they're supposed to serve and protect as a hostile foreign population. Part of the reason why is that since the 90s, and especially after 9/11, U.S. law enforcement, including police departments, the FBI, CIA, and immigration officials, have been trained by Israeli agents.
These exchange programs are exacerbating the violence in both places and lifting up the Israeli occupation as a global gold standard for policing.
And communities of color in the U.S. are disproportionately paying the price.
Police, since its origins, have been a racist, brutalizing body. But through time, their efforts of brutalization have taken on a new character. That new character is police exchanges.
Hey everyone, I'm Dina, and as a Palestinian American journalist who's reported from the occupied West Bank, so put the camera down. Okay. I've witnessed firsthand how Israel routinely targets unarmed Palestinians with force as part of its decades-long illegal military occupation of Palestinian land. I've also seen the militarized U.S. response to peaceful protesters in places like Standing Rock. And in this historic moment of uprisings in the U.S., the parallels between how American and Israeli forces crack down on civilians are more glaring than ever. So why is U.S. law enforcement receiving training from Israel, a flagrant human rights offender? And what does it mean for people on the ground? Now, it's important to keep in mind that the U.S. police and military have historically brutalized communities of color and repressed movements for justice well before the existence of Israel. But now they're building on that by learning from a state that has mastered racial profiling, crowd control, and surveillance. To understand why these trainings are so problematic, you first need some background about how Israel systematically dehumanizes the Palestinian population it completely controls. Israel's creation in 1948 enshrined a nationalist policy of Jewish Israeli supremacy at the expense of the native Palestinian population, most of whom were forced to flee their homes, becoming permanent refugees. In 1967, Israel began its repressive military occupation of what remained of Palestinian land, subjugating the entire Palestinian population, denying them the rights of citizenship, and crushing any dissent against its policies. Since then, Israeli forces have routinely fired tear gas, skunk water, rubber-coated steel bullets, and even live ammunition at unarmed protesters. So this is a state that violently controls and suppresses the rights of an occupied people. And U.S. police are learning its tactics to use against American citizens. Thousands of law enforcement officials from all corners of the country have traveled to Israel to learn police strategies and exchange tactics. These trips became increasingly common after 9/11 as pro-Israel groups used the so-called war on terror as an opportunity to push for a closer, unconditional alliance with Israel, which had marketed itself as the world's leading counterterrorism expert.
On these trips, high-ranking U.S. officials are visiting Israeli checkpoints and prisons, places where human rights groups all over the world have documented Israeli discrimination and repression and torture and killing of Palestinians.
I spoke to Stephanie Fox from the Jewish Voice for Peace. Her organization was part of a campaign called Deadly Exchange, which outlines the dangerous consequences of U.S. police trainings in Israel.
Why do you think Israel is so attractive to U.S. law enforcement agencies?
U.S. policing has always been both about enacting a war on Black and brown communities in the U.S. and around the world. So I think that the two being both rooted in racism and state violence, there's a real natural attraction and a desire to trade tactics.
So who runs these exchanges? They're organized by pro-Israel groups like the Anti-Defamation League, which calls itself the world's leading anti-hate organization. The trips are funded privately as well as through grants from the Israeli and U.S. governments, including the Justice Department. The ADL boasts that they've trained more than 15,000 law enforcement professionals and have sent more than 200 high-ranking U.S. officials to Israel. And some officers fresh off these trips have high praise.
This was an outstanding experience, something that I'll remember for the rest of my life.
You've obviously given us a lot to think about, a lot of best practices.
And this is, in fact, the finest training initiative that I've ever been a participant in.
But we've seen the ramifications of these trainings here in the U.S., with police departments treating American citizens who are exercising their constitutional right to protest as though they're under occupation, especially communities of color. Take Ferguson, Missouri, for example. After the 2014 police killing of Michael Brown, the officers' response to protesters mirrored some of the tactics used by Israeli forces against Palestinians, which civil rights icon Angela Davis has drawn attention to.
The tear gas that was being used in occupied Palestine was the same tear gas that was being used in Ferguson.
And she's right. Officers in Ferguson used the same U.S. manufactured tear gas and flashbang devices to disperse crowds that Israeli forces regularly use against Palestinians. But that's not all. In 2011, the sheriff of St. Louis County, where Ferguson is located, traveled to Israel on one of the ADL-sponsored police exchange trips. And then, 3 years after the Ferguson uprisings, which catapulted the Black Lives Matter movement to the international stage, the city's police chief also traveled to Israel for training. He said he was blessed to be part of the exchange. And throughout all of this, Palestinians have recognized the shared struggle, even tweeting support and tips to American protesters. But Ferguson is just one example. Other cities and counties where officers have received Israeli training later became the sites of high-profile police killings. That includes Hennepin County, home to Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed by police, and Atlanta, where Rayshard Brooks was fatally shot by an officer. And who could forget the militarized response to protesters in Washington, D.C. after the death of George Floyd? Officers from several agencies, including the U.S. Park Police, fired on protesters with tear gas and flashbangs. And it turns out that many officers from D.C. traveled to Israel for training, including the U.S. Park Police chief and a police commander. And then there's surveillance. Israel's massive surveillance system has inspired U.S. officials, so much so that after a former police chief visited Israel in 2008, his city adopted its techniques.
Our video integration center in downtown Atlanta is modeled after the command and control center I saw in the old city of Jerusalem.
Atlanta has installed over 10,000 surveillance cameras, which have raised serious privacy concerns. But to really get a sense of Israeli inspiration, look no further than New York City. After 9/11, the NYPD and the CIA created a sprawling covert spying operation that surveilled and infiltrated mosques and Muslim neighborhoods in the New York City area. This led to widespread and unprecedented profiling of the region's Muslim communities. A police official told the Associated Press that the program was modeled in part off of how Israelis spy on Palestinians in the West Bank. That program was heavily scrutinized in the U.S., but widespread surveillance of citizens continues today. During recent protests, U.S. officials surveilled demonstrations in 15 cities using drones and helicopters. They've recorded almost 300 hours of footage, which federal agencies and local police departments across the country can access. But it's not just the U.S. that's learning and implementing new strategies at home. In 2016, Israel copied New York City's highly controversial and racist police policy of stop and frisk. The Israeli version primarily targeted young Palestinian men who were detained and searched without probable cause. All that said, a few communities have stood up to these police exchanges and won. In 2018, Durham, North Carolina became the first U.S. city to ban its police from training in Israel. I spoke to Ajamu Dillahunt, a student and activist with Black Youth Project 100, who campaigned to make this happen.
I saw the interconnectedness between Black and Palestinian struggles. Because the United States and the state of Israel continue to strengthen their relationship, I think oppressed people within both of those places must also strengthen our relationship.
In 2014, the NAACP had called the Durham Police Department a broken system in need of repair due to a troubling pattern of racial profiling and police brutality. And guess what? The department also had a history of training in Israel. The current police chief had previously headed Atlanta's Israel Police Exchange program during her time with that department. So activists wanted to stop her from doing the same thing in Durham. Other communities have also successfully put an end to these trainings, including Northampton, Massachusetts, and the state of Vermont. But Ajamu says even though the win in Durham was exciting, racist policing isn't over.
So while we got a major victory, that we really have to look at the struggle to end the exchanges as part of a broader struggle to build a society where police are no longer necessary. And I hope this current period of rebellion represents a new era of Black and Palestinian solidarity.
Israel's occupation is illegal under international law and is premised on denying basic rights to the millions of Palestinians that Israeli forces control. Is that who we want American police, who are already in need of so much improvement, to be learning from?
Here at the Wartown Times, this season has primarily focused on the Houston County Sheriff's race for a reason. As students of history, we can see the writing on the wall for the great American experiment, and the structures of this civilization are not salvageable. There can be no return to any alleged greatness America had. When the clear language of the Constitution and Bill of Rights are as neglected as the scriptures the Christian nationalist Fourth Reich claim as their own. Society is crumbling from the top and will continue to the bottom. As we have consistently informed you, the office of sheriff in such times will either be forced to stand for the people against tyranny or will willingly assist in authoritarianism by being the boot upon the neck of the people with all its wonderful Orwellian go-go gadgets. Whichever path Houston County is on, the local police force of Wartown will be subject to it as well. So when the new God King Trump labels any and all political dissidents as domestic terrorists, our local peace officers will have to determine with themselves and their creator if such detestable proclamations will be enforced. When the maniacal new president of the corporation declares national emergencies and deploys the military on American streets to round up the undocumented, it will be up to those in Wartown behind a badge on an individual level to participate in such horrors or resist orders repugnant to the Constitution. This is why we urge you to pray for Matt Moulton, the heir apparent to the longest sitting sheriff in American history. He will be your sheriff during the collapse of the empire, and his knowledge of and position towards your unalienable rights will determine if you are treated as a community like we the people or enemy combatants that must comply or suffer the consequences. As we have said before here, perhaps the gravity of the position he sought was not upon him while running, and perhaps not. Nevertheless, the gravity is upon him now, and shall be for the next 4 years, given elections still occur after this last great American Milgram experiment. Pray for Sheriff Moulton to exhibit and walk in wisdom during these deceitful days we find ourselves in, and while doing so, have protection from the Most High. Yet, as good stewards of spirit, also pray that if he deviates from the oath he will swear by 1 centimeter towards tyranny, the angel of the Lord correct him with a flaming sword openly, as an example to any who participate with or perpetuate treason. On our part, we are disappointed that Matt Moulton was unable to give us a response to the reasonable constitutional questions we put forth to all the candidates or appear alongside Arthur Lee Harris on the Wartown Times. We do not wish to speculate as to why our repeated attempts yielded no fruit, but will give some benefit to doubt in chalking it up to perhaps he was just too busy with his campaign, which leaves us very optimistic that our future endeavors to have authentic and open dialogue with soon-to-be sworn-in Sheriff Moulton on future issues will reflect his campaign promise of an open-door policy. Only time will tell. And for this season of the Wartown Times, that commodity of the clock has run out. With this post-election special of Season 3, yours truly and the Wartown Times team will, as promised, be going on seasonal break before returning to the fray in Season 4. The world we leave you in is one where you, the people, were put in a position to vote on a national level for genocide in a blue suit or genocide in a red suit. The results of such a rigged game will produce the only thing it could have produced: a dictator and a golden idol of Christian nationalists delivering the killing blow to the American Republic on behalf of his Zionist-prepared agenda. Mass ignorance and apathy have paved the way for a man of sin, a lawless one, roaring like a lion while pretending to be a lamb, rising up out of the nation to complete a task that Palpatine would salivate over. But if you seriously participated at that level with a vote for him or the other, well, the going punchline is you get what you fucking deserve. God Emperor Trump has gone back on his paltry promises to the swaths of hillbillies duped into believing he fights for them, and he hasn't even been crowned yet. Your groceries will not go down. Your police state will only go on steroids. Martial law will continue regardless of your optimistic denial of it. Avenues of useful information like TikTok will be snatched away from you. Flesh and blood human beings will be rounded up for deportation and detainment. Project 2025 will be implemented to purge the government of any last remnants of resistance to the new Führer. Outspoken activists and protesters of Israel's war crimes will be labeled and dealt with according to the party's whims, and America will forever be stained with the blood of this genocide on its hands, which means if God is just, then judgment is come. Many will follow this course to wrath, unable to see what is taking place before their very eyes, while repeating over and over again that their new supreme chancellor of the empire is anointed by the corporate Christian God. Again, as it is written, let the blind lead the blind, and rest assured that somewhere ahead is a ditch, and it's going to be a deep one. Don't be fooled that all of this is the will of the American people, for the numbers show that most don't even bother to vote these days, seeing the fraud of the corporation for what it is both nationally and locally. Yet for those who will, it was to put in office Harris, a supporter of genocide, or Trump, a supporter of genocide. They will reap the whirlwind from the wind they have sown. With the recent Pandora's box being opened by the assassination of the CEO in New York, the actual lines of contention in our era have been brightly drawn. The world we have moved into is no longer right versus left, but up versus down. And with the alleged shooter being praised by the majority of Americans as a hero and a revolutionary, the egregore that violence is now the only way to be heard or effectual in change is now in the collective consciousness, and it will spread like wildfire. The reality, the true point of contention in America is not party versus party, but corporations versus individuals, is now apparent to most who stay informed. This means that desperate people are now making the connection that officials and officers of so-called government are actually employees of similar corporations with slightly different branding and marketing material. If fear and trembling has not entered into the bones of every single politician, elected official, or government employee as a result of the shooter being showered with praise and support, then they have grown far too complacent in their illusion of secured power indeed, because everybody in government is a CEO to somebody. As the books say, the love of money is the root of all evil, and what are corporations established for, if not for generating revenue? These dead corpses have permeated within and infected every aspect of our lives, and particularly they animate government in such a way that the people are forced to do business by threat of force. The American people as a collective have rapidly woken up to this, having been victimized by this system of entangling corporations. Their peaceful protests and redress of grievances have either gone unheard or punished via the enforcement agencies they employ, which is why America is now fertile ground for desperate people to begin following the alleged CEO assassin's footsteps in all areas of what our country has become. An emerging paradigm that the corporation of the United States of America would surely want to distract the American people away from. And of course, what better cliffhanger to leave 2024 and Season 3 of the Wartown Times off with than the invasion of your airspace by incursions of UAPs that your government is either blatantly lying to you about or incompetent to deal with? Hearings on the Hill and all the combined efforts of your alphabet agencies have yielded nothing in the way of explanations for this growing phenomenon that is now making its way over the skies of Georgia and inevitably will be boasting itself above Warner Robins Air Force Base. Rest assured, your local government will be just as clueless about what this is and what to do about it, especially if they are indoctrinated to believe that Jesus Christ is coming to bail them out of this mess their 501c3s created. But that is a tale for Season 4. Perchance these incursions of drones are currently armed, or will be armed, as the ones you pay for over in Israel. Is it possible that just like Palestinians have experienced this past year, soon Americans will know the fear of being tracked, traced, and erased by remote control weapons and wet behind the ears killers with Xbox controllers in our own country? Is that the acclamation America is undergoing? Weaponized drones flying overhead, controlled by AI with an algorithm to snuff out the non-compliant, the radical, and the ungovernable, soon to be labeled terrorists. I mean, I guess if the corporate Christian God thinks that's a good look in his so-called Holy Land, then America deserves no less a horrific treatment. And apparently, all the government has to do to enact Orwellian projects like weaponized drones is the same as they do with smart cities and flock cameras. Say it's for the public safety, and then get dumb motherfuckers to pay for it while they smile their way to the gallows, forgetting what our founders said about exchanging liberty for security. So, good people of Wartown and residents of Houston County, this is the world your humble author, narrator, fictional character, minister, and neighbor leaves you in for a time. It might be a good idea to start having some very realistic conversations with your local government employees on where they stand on substantive issues like supporting genocides or backing militarized police states. If ever there was a time to know the ideologies that motivate the individuals working in your local government without platitudes or warm and fuzzy catchphrases, it's probably now. For your sake and the sake of your family, friends, and loved ones, you might need to know if your community leaders are going to stand on their oaths to the Bill of Rights in service to you, or if we can expect to hear, "I'm just following orders," when told to do anything repugnant to the Constitution by their corporate overlords. With that, we leave you this season to go on our break and prepare our own family, friends, and loved ones for the reality of the world we have all walked into, which is to say there may be a next season, and then again, that's given the earth doesn't blow itself up sooner rather than later, because at this rate, nothing would surprise me. Until then, do as my brother and neighbor Maurice Falling, author of From Shepherds to Shadows, would say, and watch after your tribe. Study your scriptures to show yourselves approved. Speak up and speak out about the genocide in Palestine, oppose the rising police state and global governance being thrust upon you, and remember that Christ was a political activist that set the example of obedience to God through resistance to tyranny. Any Christian in compliance with a bloodthirsty state is no part of him and has no refuge from the calamities to come outside of his true body. What ideologies you stand upon and what principles you perch in these days are the ones which you will be weighed in the balance on behalf of. Lastly, as it is written, "Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. And for those on the right side of history, look up, your redemption draweth nigh."
Beep, 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 beep. Live from Wellston, Georgia, it's another episode of the Wartown Times. Be sure to like us on all of our internet doohickeys like TikTok, YouTubing, and Facebooking.
So while we're on break, I'm going to let you guys know that a lot of my time, energy, and attention is going to be focused on the CanaSense Total Wellness Collective, which is a charity that I've advocated since 2016. But a lot of you have reached out to me and you're a little unclear on what CanaSense is. So I wanted to take the time before we go on break to explain that to you guys, especially you guys here in Wartown. As you know, I'm very open about being a recovered addict and someone who lives with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So that being said, I very much empathize with a lot of you here in Wartown who also suffer from things like PTSD, anxiety, and depression. I know that for me, when I developed complex post-traumatic stress disorder in 2011, going the route of Big Pharma was not an option. I had seen what it had done to other people, and I wasn't going to do that. And of course, trying to find peace or relief at the bottom of a bottle of booze wasn't going to cut it anymore. All I knew is that my body was craving cannabis to help it calm down and to be okay. And so that's when I began using cannabis and viewing cannabis as what it should be viewed as, a medicine, because it really is. Now, then when I did, I had to get it off the black market, which is not a cool thing to do. For one, you can come under all kinds of legal scrutiny that you don't want, because that's just compounding the trauma. And as we all know, there's an epidemic of fentanyl being put in black market cannabis, and that's not cool. So I was very fortunate to come across CanaSense Total Wellness. And what CanaSense Total Wellness does is, for one, it's a 501c3 charity, California based, and they get people from all over the country via the Compassionate Use Act of 1996, the Affordable Care Act, and Article 4, Section 1 and 2 of the Constitution to become lawful medical cannabis patients with full impunity from the law, even here in Georgia. So I joined the collective as soon as I saw the lawful model and saw that they had lab-tested organic medicine that I could, from the convenience of my phone at home, order it and have that medicine delivered to me. I don't have to go under a bridge to meet with, T-Bone Jenkins or, some other shady character that's trying to hawk me some other stuff. I can directly, log into my CanaSense account, look at the ever-expanding menu of medical cannabis, the different strains, and find a strain that is custom grown for conditions such as complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And what's cool about it is, one, it's all third-party lab tested, so you can see all the percentages and that it's, toxin and chemical free right there in the lab results. But when you find a strain that really, really works for you, it's consistent. So you know that whenever you re-up, it's going to have the same effect on you, because you guys who get black market cannabis, you know that from one dime bag to one nickel sack later, you don't know if it's going to give you couch lock or you're going to be painting or playing the guitar. With CanaSense Total Wellness, if a particular strain makes you play the guitar real well, you'll have that same effect every time. And so that's why I advocate CanaSense Total Wellness. And of course, I'm going to be focusing on the Georgia chapter while we're on break, Georgia CanaSense. So, and yeah, that means that you here in the fictional city of Wartown, you can, through this lawful model, become a medical cannabis patient that is immune from legal scrutiny with all of the protections and privileges thereof, and you can order your medicine discreetly and have it delivered to you, lab tested, quality medical cannabis, so that you can live well, right? If you have any questions, you can go to canasense.com, and there's a live chat feature there. You can also call their toll-free number, 1-833-633-4208, and ask all the questions you like. They're happy to help. They have 24/7 patient support. If you are in Wartown and you want more Georgia-specific details about how you can become a medical cannabis patient with access to lawful, lab-tested, quality cannabis medicine, then go to gacanasense.com. The information is there, and they also have a live chat feature where you can ask any questions you may have for yourself or for a loved one who may be seeking medical cannabis for a myriad of ailments, from cancer to whatever you're trying to treat with plant medicine. CanaSense Total Wellness has you covered. So please, if you know anybody struggling, or if you are struggling here in Wartown, and I got news for you, after the election and what's going on in the world and in the country, every one of us are going to be losing our shit if we don't have something to stabilize us. And so, I'm of the opinion that everybody needs to be on medical cannabis, and here's why. Everybody has an endocannabinoid receptor system in their body, right? So for you to actually function normally, you're supposed to be putting cannabis in your body. But, that's just not my opinion. That's actually the opinion of some very cool medical professionals with a lot of letters after their name that I happen to know that have told me this. And anyway, so if you want to get well, and you want to get well today, in Wartown, go to gacanasense.com. If you're listening to this or hearing this anywhere else, you can go to canasense.com, get the information, sign up in minutes for free, because you have to create an account with them. And as soon as you get your welcome email and password, you get access to a plethora of intake methods, from flower, vape, edibles, tinctures, topicals. You can't imagine. And they add to their shop daily, so the selection never ends, really. So anywho, that's where I'm going to be focusing a lot of my time and energy, because one, I believe in it. It saved my life. And as a spiritual person, a minister, I believe that it is my duty to my Creator to try to help my fellow man. And I know firsthand that the CanaSense program has saved so many lives, if you guys only knew. So I'm going to be putting a lot of my focus there while the Wartown Times is on break. Zen in the car, for the spiritually minded liberty activist on the go. Liketh, shareth, subscribeth. It's what the cool kids do.